Welcome, welcome, come on in. The show's about to begin. Grab your seat and feel the nostalgia grow. Sit tight, relax, and enjoy the ride. We're so glad you're here. Let's go. It's time for Let's Play with AppleMatt.
Now, you probably know about top hats and bowlers, the men's fashion statements of the day. But I bet you don't know about the ladies' hats that were sweeping the nation too. A gal would give her eye teeth to get a real European-style topper, especially if she was going to be seen at the theater. The hat styles got so outlandish, a poor fella sitting behind a woman might see more of her hat than he did of the show. Most men in a cattle town like Dodge or a mulin town like Tombstone would wear sturdy denim and cotton duds. But professionals or sporting men would go for suits, maybe even a bow tie or braces. Outfits so fancy that they strutted like a turkey gobbler at laying time. The Earp brothers had their own distinct style. They all looked alike, and walking side by side, wearing their long frock coats, Virgil's wife Allie said they looked like a spade flush. That's a poker term for 5 cards all of the same suit. You don't hear all that much about the exploits of women in the Old West. But if you looked, you could find female pioneers doing all the things the men did. Prospecting, running hotels, writing them Western novels, doctoring, lawyering, cow punching, cow rustling, stagecoach driving, and stagecoach robbing. Women of the West were being heroes in quieter ways, too, such as surviving the long days of raising a family bigger than a load of hay, or setting up their own commercial business like this dressmaker. That was still a new thing for a woman to do in those days, and it would have made her a pioneer twice over. Look around her needle shop, and you might learn how she poked her way into the man's world of business. Now, a man who was going to wear an eye-catching fabric, like some of these, had to expect some teasing. One fella, who had a blue and black checkered shirt made, got so much ridicule from his best friend that they came to blows. This being the Wild West, the incident was finally settled with a shootout. The poor fellow with a flair for fashion ended up in Boot Hill, 6 feet under. Now, a man who was going to wear an eye-catching sewing was one of the few acceptable jobs for a woman, but ladies were making progress. For some, it wasn't happening fast enough, though, and it was these women who aspired to rise above life among the bolts of fabric. They took to wearing men's clothing so that they could do so-called men's work undercover. One gal by the name of Amelia Bloomer even started a revolt against the female dress code. She created her own unladylike fashion, bloomers. Women could buy a pattern and fabric and make their own dresses, or they could pay a seamstress to do it for them. Of course, it depended on their station in life. A pattern cost about 25 cents, while a fancy store-bought dress could set a woman back as much as $25. Women could buy a pattern and fabric and make... These posters show the look that an 1880s woman was supposed to aspire to. If she followed the fashion, a gal would be squeezing her middle into a corset and expanding her rear with a bustle. Something tells me it was a man coming up with these crazy ideas. Now, if you thought a time-saving invention like a sewing machine would be appreciated, well, you'd be wrong, partner. Fact is, one fellow who invented an early-day sewing machine was attacked by a mob of tailors. They thought the contraption would put him out of business. One magazine even wrote an editorial inquiring what on earth a gal would do with all of her free time if a sewing machine took away her stitching duties. Ladies could choose from a variety of dress fabrics. Calico and gingham were the usual choice for country gals who might have one or two everyday dresses and a Sunday go-to-meeting outfit. The society woman might wear silk, satin, or even velvet, and she could afford to wear a different dress every day of the week. These more expensive fabrics the dressmaker would have stored in a separate cabinet where she could keep a careful eye on them. Women sewed and knitted yarn partly out of necessity, and sometimes as a way to be with other gals. Being stuck at home all day, tending kids and doing homemaking was not only tiresome, but lonely to boot. So, a woman might be likely to pack up a sewing basket like this one and head on over to a quilting bee. A cherished opportunity to get out of the house and see some other women in town. Once you're a ghost, you don't replace your clothes as often. No physical body, much less wear and tear. Plus, fashions change much slower among the dead. Now, of course, when I was alive, I'd often come here to have new duds made out of some of this fabric. Especially when some pretty young thing had just moved to town and yours truly was fixing to impress her. Here's a silver dollar for you, partner, if you can answer my question right. If you were a regular cowpuncher or miner, a classy saloon like the Oriental across town might bust your wallet pretty fast. But a place like this would fit your budget. It might look mighty fine after you'd been eating dust in the mine or watching cow behinds for days on end. Drinking and gambling could cost you more than you'd bargained on. You know how distilled spirits affect the average citizen? Well, in Wyatt Earp's day, the average citizen on the next bar stool might be hiding a .45 caliber revolver, plus a mean temper to go with it. So this visit just might cost you your ability to breathe and maintain a heartbeat. Speaking of old men and Earp's decline in years, someone once asked him why so many of his adventures had taken place in or around saloons. Well, he reminded the youngster we had no YMCAs. What he meant was that in the Old West, your saloons functioned as a kind of combined community center, art gallery, if you like cowboy paintings, and a music conservatory, all of a crude frontier sort. So don't let a little crudeness put you off. Take a look around the Bucket of Blood Saloon. This sign alluded to Wyatt's keep the peace strategy, requiring everyone to check their weapons. It worked pretty well, till he tried to enforce it down by the OK Corral. Sarsaparilla, which you see as a drinking option here, was sometimes advertised as a beneficial blood purifier. Its manufacturers claimed it would give life and vigor to the blood and prevent scrofula. That there condition was a swelling of the lymph nodes that folks recognized as a forerunner to consumption, what you modern buckaroos call tuberculosis. Well now, for all the time Doc Holliday spent drinking in saloons, it sure didn't keep him from dying young of tuberculosis. This sign was addressed primarily to men who were chewing tobacco, which a lot of Westerners did in Wyatt Earp's era. Saloons and other public buildings always provided spittoons for you to spit into, but a lot of gents either just plain ignored them or missed. So floors everywhere would be covered with tobacco juice. As you might guess, this was not a pretty sight for them who abstained from the habit or for newcomers from abroad. Back east, one woman wrote about her horror upon visiting the Virginia legislature and finding its floor in this condition. Morgan Earp might have taken his last drink from a glass like this at Campbell and Hatch's billiard parlor in Tombstone. That was at 10:30 on a Saturday night in March 1882. Morgan was playing billiards with Bob Hatch, one of the owners, and had his back to the parlor's back door. Someone, partial to the Clantons, came through the back alley and shot Morgan through the back. He died within an hour. Wyatt himself was in the billiard parlor and watched the whole thing happen, helplessly. Oh, Bob Hatch won the billiards game. By default. These oil lamps are a darn sight safer than gas lamps, because you could just blow them out when you wanted to. Try that with a gas lamp, and the unburned gas would just keep pouring into the room. Let that go on long enough, and the gas would eventually asphyxiate you. For that reason, hotels would post signs in their rooms warning patrons to turn out the gas lights by turning their valves closed. When men in Wyatt's day took a hint from this sign and ordered whiskey, they drank it straight. It was considered effeminate to dilute your whiskey with soda or whatnot. Then you'd follow up with a chaser of water, milk, or buttermilk. Pretty tough, huh? This picture reminds me of a story. One Western alcoholic was said to have such an educated palate that when blindfolded he could correctly identify any kind of liquor you put to his lips. But one day someone finally handed him a drink whose taste he couldn't recognize. He took sip after sip, but it still didn't seem familiar. It was water.
You've probably heard the expression, there's no free lunch. Well, that wasn't always true, buckaroo. In fact, Wyatt Earp's city-dwelling contemporaries could almost always get a free lunch at a saloon, as long as they were drinking. Why such generosity? The threat of prohibition. Saloon keepers didn't want their patrons getting too drunk in public. And one way to restrain them was making sure they ate something while they drank. Even alcoholics could be persuaded to eat some solid food if it was free.
Poker tables were traditionally covered with this green felt. That was why Western professional gamblers were sometimes known as Knights of the Green Table. By the way, the Earp brothers' habit of dressing all in black, like the preachers of the day, was somewhat common among gambling men. You couldn't tell a gambler from a preacher until you got close enough to see whether or not the man was wearing diamond rings and stick pins. If he was either a gambler or a very successful preacher. This piano was no doubt out of tune, something awful. But there were few sources of music in the West, and folks were right grateful for anything they could get. One of Wyatt Earp's contemporaries in Tombstone was a man named Haley, who manufactured pianos back in New York. He'd travel around the West with a knockdown demonstrator piano and a crew that would assemble it in front of potential purchasers. The man made a fortune that way. Sure didn't have much competition. Around Western eating tables, unfamiliar cultures sometimes came together, each trying to shine their own light on each other. For instance, there was one old army surgeon who had married a Native American woman. One day he had some of his in-laws over for dinner and resolved to enlighten them with some Bible wisdom. He told them the story of Adam and Eve, how Eve had supposedly brought sin and suffering into the world by accepting a snake's invitation to eat the forbidden fruit, the apple. The surgeon's guest listened patiently until he was through, and then one old chief pronounced his judgment on Eve. "Well, that's just like a white woman," he said. "Now, if that had been an Indian woman, she would have taken a stick and killed that snake. Saved all the trouble." This picture reminds me. In Wyatt's day, drinking at a saloon was a rite of manhood, and you would have found the crowd here overwhelmingly male. Kind of a stag party, you might say, making these deer antlers entirely appropriate decor. In the West, it was considered acceptable for men to be drunk in public almost anywhere, at any time. Doctors would have a little drink before performing surgery, and some ministers would even take a sip or two before giving a sermon. There was a double standard, though. Women could drink in public, but they were expected to drink in moderation. That wasn't very even-handed, now was it? The West's card sharps had a variety of devious cheating methods. They would mark the backs of the cards like these, or trim their edges so they could recognize particular cards by feel. To pull that stunt off, gamblers had to keep their fingers real smooth to feel the subtle differences between the cards. One famous gambler recollected her colleagues having fingers sandpapered till the blood all but oozed through the skin. Now, Doc Holliday got into periodic disputes by using similar practices. To ensure he could settle them on favorable terms, he always wore a large bowie knife around his neck beneath his shirt. Such a knife was known, at the time, as an Arkansas toothpick. Your reward's a silver dollar for the right answer to my question. You had better get back inside and take a good look around. This is China Alley. Here you'll find a bathhouse, an opium den, and a vegetable peddler and other merchants. Chinese immigrants had helped to build the West by helping to build the railway. But by Wyatt Earp's time, after the railroad boom had ended, they found themselves unappreciated, to say the least. White folks chased them out of the mines and off their small farms and out of most jobs where good money could be made. So the Chinese had to do whatever work white people didn't want to do, like laundry, cleaning, cooking, and peddling. By working hard, though, many Chinese hung in there and built a better life for their young'uns. Click on a few doors in China Alley and you might find out how. The West's oil and kerosene lanterns were at first an unfamiliar sight to Chinese immigrants. They were used to seeing China's colorful paper lanterns. If you'd knocked on some doors in China Alley, you would have found mostly men. America's restrictive immigration laws made it hard for anyone but male laborers to come over from China. So, over time, in some Chinese family, generations of men would become American residents. But each one would have to return to China to get married, and all the wives and daughters would have to stay in the old country. Made things kind of lonesome around here. When Wyatt Earp lived in Tombstone, the town's Chinese enclave was called Hoptown. About 400 or 500 Chinese folks lived there. And behind a door like this one lived Hoptown's unofficial ruler, Ah Lum, who was also known as China Mary. She was a shrewd businesswoman, and you all wanted to be nice to her. If you were Chinese, you couldn't get a decent job without her recommendation. But she was also known for giving generous loans and gifts to miners who were down on their luck. This was the entrance to the Chinese community's bathhouse. Like the opium den nearby, having such a bathhouse was a custom imported from China. Westerners of Earp's day were still debating the merits of frequent bathing, although in much of the dry West, taking a bath was an infrequent luxury. Maintaining an opium den like this was a local custom imported from China. Now, this drug may have been highly addictive, but it was still legal in much of the West. So, as Deputy Marshal, Wyatt Earp didn't have to worry about trying to shut this place down. He just had to come by and collect the taxes.